Coast Guard, 100-ton offshore, and it's been difficult because I've been managing sailboats, but the last 2 seasons, because of the economy and now because of COVID, boats aren't just going into the water. So my son has a 19-foot day sailor, which we sell on the lakes up here. So
yeah, I had a small boat that we trailered to the reservoir here, but Diane, my wife, would not go on it because after being on a large sailboat, this particular boat heels quite a bit.
Yeah, well,
she wasn't interested in it.
Yeah. Healing is part of sailing, so
yeah.
So it is 10:01, and I am Hildy Weissert from the Sandisfield Artts Center. I want to welcome everyone. Some of you were here at part 1 on controls, which is recorded and it's online at the Arts Center website. If you missed it, really good learning from Thad about the incredible power in these little devices that we have, whatever they are. And today, Thad's topic is composition. I think you all are familiar with his bio. He's a master photographer. I think the website, his website is in the information for this session. He can tell you a little more about himself. I am recording so that if people miss this session or want to go back and hear it, they'll have a chance. I want to say a special welcome to Alan Liverman. Alan, it's great to probably see you momentarily. There you are. Alan is a Sandisfield Arts Center stalwart and has been part of the Arts Center for years and years and years. It's good to have you here. I assume you're a photographer too.
Trying to be.
We all try to be photographers. So okay, I'm assuming you can see the slide that says composition in photography.
What, Thad?
Can you see a slide that says composition in photography?
I don't see you. Are you sharing something now?
Well, that's why I'm saying something. My screen just flashed on that. Let me see what's going on here. Let's see what's going on.
Okay, so these meetings always take a couple of minutes to set up, so that's...
So just tell me, Hildy, tell me what you're seeing on the screen.
Right now, I'm just seeing all the little people.
Okay, so for some reason, I have no controls over the screen. So
okay, so I did make you a co-host.
Yeah. Let me see what something happened to that.
Oh, wait a minute, let me... okay, you're now just host.
Okay. All right, but I'm just trying to, all right, give me a second here. I don't know why this happened. Okay.
Can I get, okay.
You know, we're also used to Zoom, but every Zoom instance seems to work a little differently.
Okay.
And
so again, tell me what you're seeing on the screen. I just shared my screen, so.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. I didn't stop sharing. I think I didn't stop.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Sign.
Okay. So why won't it let me stop?
Sign in on I would like to sign in on my laptop.
Yeah, and I don't seem to have any controls over the
let
screen.
I'm going to stop.
There you go. Excellent. Okay, good. That should do it.
I hope.
Password.
Oh, just let me know when you see a slide that says composition and photography.
No.
Not yet.
You're not seeing it yet?
You know what? I'm going to stop the recording for a moment. See if you can share and then start it in case that's a factor here.
Because I have no control. I'm trying to get rid of this text on here. Let me just do a stop share for a second. And let me get rid of that. Okay. And then let me do a share screen again, and that should be it. Let's see.
There we are.
You got it, right? You see composition and photography, then we're in great shape.
We did.
It's coming.
There it
There it
is.
is.
Yeah.
Hey, perfect. All good.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Well, good. Go ahead, Hildy. It's all yours, and then I'll take over.
Oh, okay. I was just welcoming people from this on behalf of the Sandisfield Arts Center. This is part 2 of the 2 free online workshops Thad has been doing. He is a master photographer. And Thad, you can just say a little bit about your bio, but well-known teacher here at PS 183.
IS 183.
IS 183, also with Ollie, and did a couple of workshops for us at the Sandisfield Arts Center that were very well received last year. So we're very glad to have you, Thad. And Thad, I think you
Well, thank you
generally
very much.
set a very
Yeah.
interactive tone, and people can just kind of jump in when they want to. But up to you.
Yeah, I think if you, I think you could use the chat function if you like, or you could ask questions. There are areas after each section that questions that I've allocated for questions. So you may want to wait until the end of the section, and then we can move on from that. But beyond all of that, good morning. So last time we spoke about the various photographic controls that you have in all your different cameras and smartphones. And that's a wonderful aspect of life. But one of the things that is missing is that understanding the technology of photography doesn't necessarily provide you with the ability to take a better picture. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about composition in photography, but probably from a way that you've not heard it in the past. I'm not going to, at the very end, I'll talk about some of the templates that are available, but I'm going to talk about all the different elements that make a great photograph a great photograph. The images I put together are my own, and they've been not only used publicly, but they've been created in part for this presentation. So I'm going to start, and we'll move forward. So one of the things that people ask me is they say, well, what's the greatest disappointment you have in photography right now? And I say, well, it's not COVID, it's not economic, it's the fact that photography has sort of become a commodity in the sense that people could take a still camera, a smartphone or a regular camera, and they could press the burst mode and they could select 30 or 40 pictures. And then later on, after they've left the site, they could go through and then pick the best picture that was sort of automatically taken for them. I would say 70% of the people that I instruct do that, and that's something that I try to have them move away from. But the idea is that a wonderful picture, if you include your vision and if you include the technology that your camera system has to offer. So what is, the question of people, what is composition photography? Well, there's this definition, this Alexander Wrigley, it's probably one of the most well-known definitions on the internet, but he talks about it being individual subjects within a frame, okay, to form a final image. You can alter composition by moving around, changing lenses. But one of the things he doesn't talk about, and I'm going to get into this, is that he talks about the concept of changing the elements within the subject matter, but I don't think he goes far enough. I think that moving around is one thing, and you'll see what I mean by that. Zooming in and zooming out is something else. Changing lenses, okay. Even crouching down, I believe in looking up, down, sideways, and all these other things. But he doesn't talk about the exposure concepts, focusing, shutter speed, all the things that are truly wonderful about photography. So I have a definition, which I will give you in a second, but I think that if you're going to create well-designed, and I use the word design versus composition, if you can create well-designed photography, it has to have a base in technology, but also has to have your vision, because the camera is just a transfer device. 30 years ago, it was an Instamatic. 90 years ago, it was a large field camera. 10 years ago, when the smartphone came out, it became your phone. You're transferring what you see to a device that allows other people to see it. And I think you've got to remember that that is something that is it's an extremely critical point of what design or composition and photography is. We are going to talk about photography a little bit today, but we're primarily going to talk about composition, visualization. There's a big word out there called pre-visualization. And pre-visualization is a term that a lot of photographers disagree with, but when you sit down and you discuss with them, if you know well-known photographers, guys, women who do work for National Geographic and other major magazines, that you talk to them about this or you listen to some of their discussions, and they are constantly thinking about photography and they're constantly thinking about their next shoot. So they're sort of pre-visualizing what they're going to do. So what I'm going to talk about is this visualization aspect of it. So I use a simple, for me, but a valid protocol. This protocol does not have to be something you follow. I'm not telling you your protocol is incorrect. I'm telling you that the protocol that I developed is one that I feel very, very comfortable with. And when I've taught this, people have loved it. People have said, this is a great idea. And matter of fact, well, it is. Anyway, so people love this, they've enjoyed this, and they found this to be a base of sort of moving forward with their creativity. I don't have a specific order. I'm going to lay out a specific order, but some days, some of these elements overpower other days, and I think you've got to be aware of that. So it's the old Zen concept that you need to be one with your visual sense. You need to be one with your visual photography as well. So I call them simply the 3 ings. There's actually 4, but I call them the 3 ings. And the reason I call them the 3 ings is because they all work very well for me. So I think about photography, creating images, composition, even when I don't have a camera in my hand. I'm always looking for things, seeing things, and putting them in the back of my mind, sort of in an archive to say, oh, I got to remember this next time I come, or I've got to come back next week when the lighting is going to be better and do this. And I'm always thinking about light. I mean, light is what photography is. So I'm always thinking about the different times of day, the morning where the shadows might be long, noon where the shadows are going to be short, in the afternoon when the shadows are going to be very deep. I'm also thinking about the different flavors of light that occur throughout the day. So in the morning, light tends to be more reddish and yellowish. Midday tends to be more blue, fades into green, blue, and then the evening it's rich in oranges and reds. And I think all of those aspects need to be considered when you're creating an image, because the design of an image are elements with the image, as Alexander has says, Wrigley says in his, but in actuality what is occurring is you're capturing light. And whether it's color or black and white, the light is going to impact that. And again, if you ask nearly any photographer that's making money out there, they're going to tell you that their understanding of light is critical. But thinking about what you're going to do, and I'm going to give you examples of that, are part of what motivate me to continue to take some pictures, right? Also, and I'm going to give you examples, is seeing. Thinking is one thing. So I have a friend of mine who lives in Manhattan. He is an incredible photographic thinker. And he just never really adapts the thinking to seeing. And we have long discussions about, well, if you think about photography so much, and if you always have a camera in your hand, why aren't you taking pictures? And there's a lot of different reasons why he does that. But seeing is something that you need to have in your head all the time. You need to be thinking about photography, the compositions, seeing elements that can be used and not used. Because today, a photograph, an image, whether you do it automatically or whether you adapt it in post-production, is what a lot of people call compositional integration. And what that means is you're taking a scene that many people are seeing, and then you are capturing it in a way that only you see it, and then you are letting people visualize that. And that seeing is really the critical aspect. If you look at any of the greatest photographers, they all have developed some sort of personalized style that changes over the course of the years. Weston, Irving, Penn, all of them, even more of the modern photographers, they develop styles. Or if they're hired, like I did for years, I did editorial and advertising photography, you're being hired to adapt your style to an art director's style. The whole key is seeing. So you got to think about it, you've got to see it. And seeing, here's an example of seeing. So back in May of last year, I decided I was teaching in New York City on Mondays, and I decided I want to go to Coney Island, and I wanted to take the train down. And during my train trip, I wanted to take pictures of homeless people on the trains. So I thought about this a lot. I did some research. I found out that I think it was the M train or the C train had the highest levels of homeless people on them. It turns out that one of the trains headed down to Brooklyn. So I jumped on the train, and I was very much aware of what I wanted, because I thought about it in great detail. And I carried with me a digital black and white camera, and I carried with me a traditional DSLR, and I photographed both in black and white and in color, depending upon how I thought these pictures should look. So my seeing was aware. I was very, very much aware of what I wanted to see. And I think being aware of what you want to see is a critical aspect, because then you start to see more than other people. And that's where I think unique pictures come in. And these are two shots of some homeless people on the subways that both one fit the color mode and one fit the black and white mode. The other part of my 3 protocols, which will give you the 4th one in a minute, is doing. I'm a big believer in doing things. So if you're going to think about something and if you're going to visualize it in your head, then go out and take the picture. And for me, I've got a rule. I always have a camera with me, whether it is a smartphone, a more traditional camera, film camera, digital cameras. There's always a camera with me no matter where I am. And oftentimes I'll be taking a picture, and whether it's film or digital, I may not look at it or for weeks, and then I'll process the film and I'll say, oh, I remember that, and I could literally lead my thought process into where this picture came from. And the last part of it is this concept of feeling. I've noticed, and this is not a critique, I don't criticize people's work because I don't know what their mindset is, but what I've seen missing from a lot of photography today is a feeling. And feelings is tough, and I'll explain the reasons why. But I see people taking a lot of pictures. I see people thinking about the pictures. I see people sort of pre-visualizing them, but they are just pictures. There's no mood, there's no emotion, there's no feeling to that. And feeling is something that is difficult to add, because you're asking you to put your emotions into an image, and most people take a camera from about 5 feet 5 inches high, and that's it. And they're not adding anything to the emotional aspect of the photograph. And we're gonna talk about how you can do that. So thinking, seeing, doing, and feeling are really key elements of my protocol, and they don't always go in that order. So some days I will be in a very emotional mood, and I will search for images in my head that are emotionally based, and I will try to find them. And I think a lot of people who do street photography could feel the same way. And feeling can be, feeling in your photography can be linked to landscapes. It can be the way you see a landscape and the lighting of the landscape. I want to show you some examples of that as well. I don't really know enough. Well, you know what? If you identify what you know, you should be okay. But then identify what you don't know and determine how much of that you need. So I've got another friend of mine who's a technological devotee, and he spends more time worrying about the technology of photography than his photography, and his stuff all looks sort of the same. And when people see his stuff, they say, oh, and they go on to the other one and say, oh, and they go on to the other one and they say, oh, and it's not like an oh, it's like, oh, I saw this already. But his concept is he has so much information about technology that he forgets about some of the other points that he needs to be aware of. And this goes back to, what do you need to know? You know, the last session we spoke about some basic camera controls. Today I'm going to show you how to adapt those. And in theory, if you were shooting film 25 years ago, you only had 3 or 4 camera controls. You had the speed of the film, ISO or ASA was called then, the lens that you had, and some of the more technical knowledge of shutter speed and aperture. And that was all you had. And some of the greatest photographs in the world were made with that. So you don't really need to know a lot. You just need to know what you need to know, and you need to know how to adapt that. And lastly, what you do not need to know. I experiment with a lot of different media. I'm working in film, I'm working with instance, I'm working with pinhole, but I only go to the degree where I reach a satisfaction point. I don't oversaturate myself. And I know many people who oversaturate themselves. And what ends up happening is they learn more than they need. And they really are missing out on opportunities because they literally have too much knowledge. And that may sound strange, but it is something that it's more and more apparent to me out there that people have actually too much knowledge about certain things and not enough knowledge about other things. By nature, I instinctively create images. People tell me, what do I do? And I say, well, I design images. And I'll read something, I'll see something, I'll watch a movie, or I'll be walking in the street, and then all of a sudden a series of images builds up in my head, and then I try to adapt that to my own images later on. So I'm going to, and any questions about these first, 15 to 16 slides? Otherwise, I will go on and get into some of the details. Let me see if I could get.
Thad, I just
Yes.
asked in the chat.
I see
With
that.
the
Yep.
homeless people, just, did they react? We're always thinking about, sort of a Walker Evans kind of thing. What did they know you were taking them? Did they react?
So I issue caution. In all the years I've been photographing, I've only been assaulted twice, and both times occurred on the subway. So today, what I do is one of my cameras, I have for my camera a right-looking device, so I could actually add it to the top of my camera, and I could literally sit there and I could take pictures without people knowing. So I often do that. In those two situations, both of those people, the one in the color situation, the guy was totally out of it. And I don't think if an alien spaceship landed in that car, would he have noticed it? And the other guy was sound asleep. But it is a concern, and I would be very cautious in it. Today, one of the other cautions I would prescribe is photographing children, because there's a lot of concern about kids being put on Facebook in weird compromising situations. So you need to be aware that there may be people who are annoyed about it. Now, if you ask them and they say yes, they tend to pose, and you're losing some of the uniqueness of that moment. I think it was Margaret Mead who discovered that when a tribe they knew they were being observed, they actually reacted to the observation rather than to the natural instinct. And that's what happens if you approach somebody and say, hey, can I take your picture? And there are ways around that. One is, like I said, a right angle device for your camera. If you have a camera that has a flexible screen on the back, the screen can be angled up, so you could literally sit on a train, look down, and be taking pictures without anyone really seeing anything. There is, I have another device for a camera that if I'm taking a picture this way, I'm actually looking that way. It's a 90-degree right angle, so the camera is looking at the photograph, but I'm actually looking this way, so the people don't make eye contact with me and they assume I'm not taking a picture of them. But I would be cautious about taking pictures of groups. Bruce Davison in the 70s did a series of photographs that I think on the subway that I think today would be nearly impossible to take, because in this relatively long series he shot, he never was assaulted or forced off a train. Today, I've seen that happen more times than I wish to remember. Did that answer your question, Hildy? Yep.
Yes, Thad, thanks.
Good. Okay. All right. So, what is composition? So this example, this is something that you don't need to know all of this. This is something you'll see on the internet. It's called the new periodic table, the periodic table of photography composition. And it basically has about 60 different items that you need to consider. And yes, you need to consider these items, but you don't need to consider every one of these items in every moment of every day of every picture. There are things that you may want to consider. For example, you may want to think about capturing movement, and which means you need to know, and I'll get into this later, you need to understand 3 or 4 things about movement. Or you might say, hey, look, I'm looking to capture incredible depth of field. Well, you only need 2 or 3 things about capturing depth of field. If you get bogged down with all these different things like what f-stop, what ISO, what my processing is going to be, what my film stock is going to be, what my digital is going to be, you're going to become overwhelmed and you're probably not going to create as much as you want. This is a great reminder, but it goes back to those 4 points that I mentioned, that this is probably much too much. You need to know it. And I find it amazing how many people carry around charts like this. And they say, oh, well, look, it's sunny and whatever, whatever. And they go down the chart, and there's actually an app, and they say, here's what it's going to be. And then they say, oh, it didn't come out the way I wanted it to come out. So this is sort of me, it's an overkill of what you need to understand, okay? So over the last 20 years, I've sort of redeveloped my photography. Prior to that, I did editorial photography, did a lot of selling photography. I did travel photography. I did advertising photography. And as well, I own a marketing agency in New York City. So photography has always been part of me one way or another. But over the last 20 years, particularly since 1999, I've had 3 major emotional impacts on my life that have caused me to rethink my photography. So I call this my periodic table, which I update regularly, right? And I do this in a way that, as I said before, I don't use every element for every image, but I go out with some ideas in my mind, and I sort of categorize them. I sort of, compartmentalize them and say, hey, I'd like to do this today or that today or this today, and then I'm more aware of my situation. So also, for me, photography is a very, very personal extension of my life. So if I'm not moved by it, I'm not doing it. I don't really take pictures any longer for recording purposes outside of documentary. I don't get hired out to do weddings. I never did, or public relations events, because I find those to be very, very unfulfilling. So for me, photography has to be a personal link, and I have to be moved by the scene or by the scene I'm going to create. And I work with a very, very basic list. I work with lenses. Now, most of you probably have lenses that are what they call telephoto, which they zoom in and out, and you have a lens focus from maybe 18 millimeter, very, very wide, to 300 millimeter, very, very narrow. I work with both prime lenses, which are a single focal length, and I work with telephoto lenses. Creatively, prime lenses are what I like because I actually think about the viewpoint. So your eyes see roughly 43 millimeters. That's why most lenses on cameras came as 50 millimeters. But 43 is about this wide, 300 is about that wide, 18 is about that wide, right? So when you work with a prime lens, there are more controls you have over the picture than with a telephoto lens. Aperture is the ability to make something in and out of focus. I'll show you examples of that. I traditionally don't use filters a lot. I use filters primarily in black and white, but there are ways of enhancing photography using a variety of filters. People get overwhelmed by the sensor size of their camera. They go, oh, I've got a 5/4 sensor, I got a full, it's all great. But at the end, what are you going to do with that picture? I have a full sensor camera because sometimes, matter of fact, I just sold one of my photographs to some guy in Brooklyn he enlarged it up to a wall. It's roughly 16 feet long by, I think, 12 feet high. So I needed a full sensor for that. Film, if you're using film, weather is an important aspect, and I'll explain to you why that is later on. And I keep detailed notes on my pictures. And I do that because I may photograph something today, but I may not get to process it, or I may not get to look at it for weeks. A lot of different reasons. I get more joy out of clicking the shutter than doing anything else. So I need to go back and understand what that point was. Also, your point of view, where you are, whether you are looking straight at something, lower than something, higher than something, right angles, left angles. How far away are you from the image? You'll notice those pictures of the 2 homeless people. I was fairly close. Now, I didn't get right on top of them because that would have been sort of an invasion of their privacy. But I brought my image in enough so that they filled the screen. Oftentimes, you'll see shots where the key element is very, very tiny in the screen, and you're lost in the clutter of around it. Also, I find with myself, my mood changes. And when my mood changes, my risk factor goes up or goes down. The way I see people, the way I see faces changes. And I'm a big believer in this thing called observation of photography. I tend not to go out and take a picture immediately, though oftentimes I do. I tend to observe the situation, and I may then take a photograph and walk around to another angle and take a photograph, because for me, that instant I took the photograph was an instant in time, but there's another instant right after that that I might miss a better shot. So I'm always trying to look around. I'm always trying to observe. And again, if you speak to professional photographers, most of my professional assignments were multi-days because each day offered different things in weather and time and color in a variety of things. And that occurs here in the Berkshires or wherever you may be. In China, it doesn't really matter. You can go to all these different things that are going on. If you're taking pictures of people, look in their eyes. Their eyes will tell you more than anything else. I've got a friend of mine, Jeffrey Kay, who's an incredible portrait photographer. He uses large format cameras, but he's always focusing on the eyes. The eyes are just magic. I try not to set up photography. So there was a pretty nasty story last year about a couple of major famous photographers who turned out that the images that they said were natural were actually set up. And that became very offensive to the photography community because they felt that they were misled. And a more recent story, back in March, a photographer for Sony, who Sony was paying $100,000 a year and gave him about $150,000 worth of equipment, he was saying, oh yeah, all these are natural shots. It turns out that not only were they set up, he actually plagiarized other people's imagery and combined it in post-production. For me, I don't use post-production to do what they call compositional or composing photography. I use it for the very, very basic. So I could see in my own work if something is set up, so I try not to do that. I think you need to love and understand light. We live in an area where there are basically 14 or so stages of light in the day from dawn until dusk, and then even after that. So I think you have to understand what that does to your photography. What's the mood of your subject? You've got to think about where you're going to be. Being a sailor, as a matter of fact, I told somebody today who was stuck out on Block Island, I said, well, when you go out boating, you can't look at the day you're going. You got to look at the day you're going and the day you're coming back, because over those 5 days, a hurricane could appear, right? And I think the same thing with photography. You need to be aware of what's going on. I always have my camera ready. So my batteries are charged, my viewfinder is clean. I make sure I have enough of space on my card so I'm ready. And then I also believe that there's a space between everything in life. And oftentimes, if I photograph here and I photograph here, because I'm overwhelmed with those two images, I miss the great shot that's over here. Now, Hildy, you mentioned Walker Evans, who's probably one of my most favorite photographers, probably my top 3 photographers of all time. He was a magician on that. He would photograph the right moment at the right time because he observed. So, okay. So I'm going to open this up to questions in a minute, but what follows are a series of images that I visualize. And I'm a big believer in, I don't take pictures, I create images, because anybody can take pictures, right? And what I try to do is I try to include elements in my images that enhance the actual subject matter and the compositional aspect of it. And again, it's my list. You can certainly feel free to use it, but I think you'll see you'll adapt your list, right? So any questions? No questions? All right, I am going to move on to some of the images themselves. So a key element of composition is exposure. So the other night I was out photographing sunsets for a class I'm giving on Monday, and one of the positions going to be is, here's an automatic exposure and here's a manual exposure. So what is an automatic exposure? An automatic exposure is an exposure that you allow the camera to make the decisions of adjustment for you. And that's fine, because the camera's been designed to have this thing called 18% gray, and it gives you a very, very unique photograph. But manual, where you are adjusting the settings to your own desire, is a much more exciting mode for me. And I probably shoot 90% of my images on a manual setting. But here's an example. This is a sunset in Rock Hall, Maryland, last May, that I was on a charter. I was leaving the next morning for a 5-day charter, excuse me. And I was walking around the marina, and I came upon this little place, and I said, this is sort of cool, but the image really didn't do anything for me. And even today, when I see this, it doesn't do anything for me. And what I did, and I do this often, is I said, this is a good example. So I shot this on automatic, and then I shot it on manual. Now, you may say, oh, it's too dark, it doesn't, well, whatever, and that's fine. But for me, the image on the right is much more powerful, much more emotional, and much more mood altering than the image on the left. And all I did, this is done with an iPhone, all I did was underexpose. So I put my finger on my screen and I dragged my icon down, and the picture got darker and darker to a point that I felt was visually attractive. So manual gives you that capability. And again, it doesn't matter which of these images you like. A lot of people like the automatic image. I don't. I happen to like the manual image. So I think that the power of your control of the composition needs to begin with an understanding of what exposure in your camera can do for you. Another aspect of photography that people miss out on a lot is aspect ratio. Aspect ratio is the proportion that your camera sees, the viewfinder you see. In a iPhone, you have a very, very long aspect ratio. In most smartphones, you have multiple aspect ratios. They could be square, they could be rectangle, they could be elongated, they could be more of a rectangle, they could be very long, or you could set them up. Your cameras, whether it is your iPhone, your smartphone, your Google, or your traditional digital camera, nearly all of them have a setting where you could actually change the aspect ratio. So you could change a shot from being rectangular this way to be elongated just by a flick of a menu. And you'll see the difference in the next two shots. So this is, I was on assignment about 5 years ago in Sardinia. This is a town called Castel Sardo, or in Sardinia. And some of the requirements were an overview of the town. That was part of the requirements, right? So this is done with what they call a horizontal aspect ratio. So the camera was turned on the sides, right? And I'm shooting right into the sun, which is another rule you're not supposed to do, but you should definitely do it. And it was a good image. As far as I'm concerned, it was fine. But I felt that I'm not showing the scope of where I was. So I turned the camera traditionally now in a horizontal mode. And I think I've got a broader, I feel when this image was published and I got some feedback, people felt that they were more likely to walk into the image on the right than they felt they were constrained on the image on the left. And all that was a switch of the camera from this vertical to horizontal. And now this is with a wide angle lens, so there are a couple of tricks going on here, but love to hear if you agree or disagree, but the image on the right you're walking into, the image on the left you're not. And that is a simple focus or simple issue called vertical versus horizontal. And again, your cameras all have that ability. The majority of smartphone cameras are taken in a vertical manner. People turn it around, but most of them are taken in a vertical manner. And it does make a difference in a lot of different ways. So for example, left two of the same shots, vertical on the left, horizontal on the right. The reason the horizontal image is darker is because the meter had more to read, because I actually changed the aspect ratio. So again, you can see there are two different feelings to these photographs. They were taken moments apart, just the time it took me to literally change the aspect ratio. Also, you have the ability today to use panoramic photographs, which didn't really exist. So on the left is an iPhone photograph from up in Maine a couple of years ago near Arcadia. And on the right is a film camera that I once had called a Hasselblad Pano, which took panoramic images on film. This is something that people fail to use, or they use it in a more traditional fashion. But panoramic images is very, very cool. But panoramic images shouldn't stop at horizontal panoramic images. You have the ability of using a panoramic concept as a vertical image. It's a bit more inventive and it's a bit more creative, and it takes a little bit more practice. But if you look on the image on the left, that's me. I'm in my own photograph. So I started the photograph, I moved my camera up, spun it totally around to aim at me, and I got myself included in the photograph. I was also hiking the other day, and I was trying to figure out what's the best way of taking photographs of trees for experimental reasons. And I discovered that if I use my panoramic image, I get the tree in almost perfect form. This is a little bit distorted. So using panoramic images outside the horizontal is a good way of adding composition and creativity, and using it in the vertical could do that as well. Also, all your cameras have the ability, smartphones have the ability to take a panoramic image either from the left side or from the right side. Just have to tap the screen, and many of your DSLRs have that same capability as well. Also, when you're taking a panoramic image, if you slow up or speed up the motion of the camera, it affects the image recording. So you see all of this distortion here is because I sped up or slowed down, most likely sped up. And what ends up happening is elements become distorted. And what you get is you get a sort of unique waving type of motion. And you'll see this on Facebook where you see a 360-degree image, because what ends up happening is it's literally reprocessing the image. And then you can use panoramic images traditionally. So last January, I was at a Monument Valley in Utah, and this is like 4:30 in the morning. It was minus 16 degrees. I had a view camera set up and my shutter froze. I quickly ran into my car, got my traditional camera, and I did this panoramic view of the sun. I did change the aspect ratio. So what I normally would have seen was only from here to about here, but instead I've now got this vastness of the site. So if you're going to be using panoramic images, consider not only using them horizontally, vertically. Currently, they don't work at angles. I've tried that. But panoramic images do have a powerful statement they make. And again, in your traditional DSLR, there is more than likely a setting in the menu that says aspect ratios 9:16 or 16:9. So before I go on to the next section, anyone have any questions about these past slides? Let me get the chat open again. And if not, I will move on. Okay, when this time. Oh, so yeah, okay. So if you could just mute yourself when I'm talking. Okay, so none other questions. All right, so I'm going to move on to focus. So people think focus, everything has to be sharp, right? And everyone uses automatic focus, which is fine, and there are reasons why I use it, reasons why I don't use it. But if you want to excuse me, if you want to experiment with what they call selective focusing and manual focusing, and I'll get into those in a second. So back in April, I was on assignment. I was given a project down in Annapolis to photograph the Annapolis Bay Bridge at various times of sunrise. And I didn't realize at the time there was no real simple access to it because everything was private land. But this is one of the images I shot. The Annapolis Bay Bridge is over here on the left. And, you know, it fit the requirements of the assignment, but I didn't like it. So what I did is I actually switched my camera to manual focus, and I made the image out of focus. So this is essentially the same image, but now with the image out of focus. Now, is it an image that you can identify? No, but it's a hell of a cool fine art image as far as I'm concerned. I could see this image walking into a major corporation in their boardroom, and people would be sort of meditating on the image itself. But I couldn't have done this if I used this with automatic focus, because automatic focus is going to it's going to determine what's in focus and what's out of focus and make that decision for me. So this is called selective focusing. Selective focusing is something that is quite unique. Selective focusing works best if you have a prime lens, meaning that the lens only has 1 millimeter size, 35, 50, 100, whatever it may be. And what happens is you focus on an item that's in the picture and you open the aperture up wide open. So right then and there, you need to be either in your AV mode or in your manual mode. And what ends up happening is everything behind what you've focused on becomes out of focus, magically, as they say, and nearly everything in front of that image becomes out of focus. And it's called selective focusing for a specific. And a lot of photographers use this technique. They will focus, in the case of the pickup truck, which is in Shamrock, Texas, they'll focus here on one photograph on a tripod, they'll focus here on the other, and they will adapt them in post-production together, and you get this ultra-real focusing point called hyper-focusing. You also get a unique benefit of when you focus is, if you could see in the background here, this is at the Beckett Quarry. This is a guy who was swimming out. I asked if I could take his picture. He loved the idea, and I shot it. But you notice how the background is all out of focus, and it actually adds sort of to the mystery. That is because I had this at an ultra-wide aperture, and he was further enough away from the background that the background gets diffused. That's called bokeh. Bokeh is this, in Japanese, it means blurry. It is the ability to control what is in focus or what is out of focus. And while I was at the Beckett Quarry, if you haven't gone there, it's a great place to walk around. Oops, sorry. I photographed this gear system, an old winding piece here, and you'll notice this is very, very sharp, and it separates itself from the background, but the background is not out of focus enough that you can't identify what it is. Oftentimes, the background becomes so out of focus, like here, you don't know what it is, and that could detract from your composition. This next focus is this picture is something that it's in Great Barrington. It's actually on the Sheffield Great Barrington border. It is a what is it? A plow that lays down gravel, and I got ultra closest to the gears, and I just focused here, and everything else drops out of focus. Now, for me, this is a fine art picture for a lot of different reasons, and this is the kind of image that I really love to take. I love that I created this entire image. You don't know really what it is until you question me, and I'll tell you it was a paver is what it's called. But this is selective focusing. So what I did is I had my camera set, in my version, manual. I opened my aperture up to its widest aperture, which in this camera is 1.1, and then I adjusted my ISO and I adjusted my shutter speed so I would get a good exposure, and I got this, what I consider a unique image. And you have the ability, there are lenses that you could buy that have what they call special bokeh. And special bokeh means the lenses have been designed to give you different out of focus shapes, from circles like you see here, to squares, to highlights, to diamond-like shapes. And they're fairly inexpensive. There's a company called Meyer Goretz, which sells them anywhere from a couple $100 to a couple $1,000. But you could buy these lenses that give you incredible, beautiful bokeh. You could also buy filters that you put on the top of your lens that will give you a similar type of effect. Any questions on focus? I'm going to open up. Sorry, what?
Use Vaseline as well, you know. On the
Well, Vaseline is great. I'm going to talk about that later. That's dangerous, though, and I'll explain the story for that as well. Okay, so we have no chats. I'm going to talk about Vaseline later on because I've got a fairly funny story about it. But anyway, so okay, the next thing is movement. So there are days when I will go out and I will say, hey, I'm going to focus my, sorry for the pun, I'm going to target myself on movement. And what I will do is I will be trying to interpret movement in a lot of different ways. Of course, for me, life is not static. And I don't believe that photography should be static as well in every case. There are a couple different controls. You have panning, which I'll show you in a second. You have motion, moving the camera as well. You have shutter speed. You control a lot of that. And now you have this ability of long exposures where you could literally do time exposures over fairly short periods of time that add to the creativity of the photograph. Left-hand side is panning. So here I am. I'm in Housatonic with a class from Ali a year ago. And one of the guys in the class says, hey, look, I'm going to run across the street. Show me how we use panning. So basically, I took my camera, set it on a slow a shutter speed of around the 60th of a second, and I followed, and then when the subject was in the middle of my imagery, my viewfinder, I took the picture and I continued to go. So I never really stopped. I just follow. So you see what happens. He is in fairly sharp focus. He could have been sharper if I used a different shutter speed, but the background becomes sort of a blur. And you could do this with anything. You could do this with left or right cars, with airplanes, with people, kids jumping in pools, trains, subways. It doesn't really matter. It just takes a little bit of time of understanding what those capabilities are. The slower the shutter speed, the more motion you're going to get, but you have to adapt your exposure to that. Now, with digital cameras, you have a thing called TV, which is your shutter speed control. You could set that at a low shutter speed, and the camera will automatically adapt the other exposure controls to fit that. The image on the right is actually a window on 86th Street in Columbus that I wanted to, a reflection in a window, sorry, that I really wanted to experiment with movement. So what I did is I did a series of exposures from a 60th of a second down to a 10th of a second, just to see how much movement that I could capture. So you got to remember, the light, the shutter's now open, right? And you're moving, and the camera is exposing until the shutter closes. So you can create all sorts of cool shapes. There's a technique called light painting, which is a very, very cool tool to use. I'm not sure I have any examples in here where you literally could use light as a painting tool. And then, I teach in the city, and last year I taught at half the season. I had to catch a 5 o'clock train out of Wasaic, right? And so I always have a camera with me. So what I did here is, this is the subway. This is the Metro North, and I was photographing purposely with a very slow shutter speed. And if you could see it here, you'll see there's a guy's face right there, right? Now that person really didn't move during the exposure, but everything else moved around him. So you have that ability to create it abstractly, and then you have the ability to use it creatively for capturing anything that moves at any speed. Water moves, depending on the river or the creek or the stream, water moves roughly about 7 or 8 miles an hour. So if you start experimenting with that by shutting slowing down your shutter speed, the water starts to become a smear. Now there's a technique with neutral density filters that allows you to control it even greater. But a lot of pictures, instead of having sharp water, which would distract the eye, my eye focuses right over here. And then you could do the same with waterfalls. So if you go to Umpachini Falls, you go to Bash Bish Falls, you go to any falls, and you put your shutter speed on a 15th of a second, setting it at TV, what's going to happen, the ISO is going to be set automatically, and the aperture is going to be set automatically, but you're going to get some of these dreamlike images. And they're very simple to create, but they make a major difference. So you could see 2 different styles of just using motion with your camera's controls. Then you could also imply motion. Imply motion is a little bit more difficult, but this is an assignment I had down in the Keys a bunch of years ago. And one of the requirements of the assignment was to take some photographs that invited people into the page. A very, very sort of vague statement by the art director. But this picture invites you into the page. And invites you into the page because your eye is brought into this is called a leading edge. Your eye is brought in and you try to follow, then you sort of get caught in this hole here. So you imply motion by creating and by using a couple different techniques, which I'll talk about later on in the presentation. But motion doesn't always have to be something moving or something physically moving. You can imply motion by the imagery as well. So I see there is a question. Let me get this up here. Okay, let's see. Beautiful picture. Thank you, Hildy. Okay, so there was a comment, which is great. Thank you. The other thing about motion is it's not only the motion of, it's not only the motion of the picture, it is literally the motion of what you're being surrounded by. So this photo was taken about 2 years ago over at Laurel Lake. And it was a sunset shot. It was in early October. It was cold. I really didn't want to be there for a long amount of time. But I knew that if I waited for a little while, the sky was going to dramatically, the sky was going to dramatically change. And this is what happened. Moments after I took this picture, excuse me again, this picture appeared. Now there's a slightly different cropping, but you can see what happened to the sky. The sky was totally different than the previous picture. Then I waited even longer, and I started playing with the camera. I made this shutter speed even slower, so now I'm getting motion of the clouds being blown away by the wind, and motion smooths out the water. And then I decided to zoom in and zoom out with my long exposure. So I'm not only getting motion this way, I'm now getting motion this way. Very, very easy techniques to handle. I think this whole thing was about a 2-hour session, but I believe in waiting. And it goes back to this observation aspect of it. And the next shot is a shot that I waited for. So I was in Southern Nevada in 2005, had an assignment to do a couple of national parks down there. And this picture was, I like this shot for a lot of different reasons, but I noticed that to my left, the sky was getting darker. And I didn't really know why. And I realized that there was probably a cold front coming in. And I waited until this image contained this darkened sky, and then I photographed it. And to me, I wish I would have photographed it without it to show you the comparison. This is a stronger image because a couple things happened. Number one is that the metering was changed dramatically, and there's a lot of nice things going on with shapes, but this darkness here sort of balances this shape here. So again, I waited. And then a shot, I was in Belgium, and I was assigned to photograph Gothic churches or churches of a specific style. So I get to this church and I set myself up, and I was there for about, I'm going to say an hour and a half. And the rector of the church kept on saying to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, waiting for the right light." And he said, no, you're waiting for God's light. I said, well, I'm waiting for whatever, I'm waiting for the light. And, you know, somewhere about an hour and 15 minutes in, the light came through at the right angle, and I added to the depth of this photograph by using the light. Now, I use an app called TPE, which tells me when the angle of light is going to be at certain positions in the sky. I'll show you, talk to you about that later, how to manage it, how to measure it manually. But this is this idea of just waiting. And sometimes waiting is the best thing you can do. I normally carry at least one book with me so that I could read while I wait. So today, we are primarily focused on using one media, and that tends to be a digital media. So it's fine, and most people shoot in color. I always carry with me a camera that can shoot in color and a camera that can shoot in black and white. And I also always carry with me a film camera. So color image, gorgeous, love the shot. Again, dawn at Monument Valley. This is black and white later in the day. This is done with a film that's called orthochromatic. Orthochromatic means that it converts certain tones to darker tones. Panachromatic film converts every color tone into a separate lighter, or a separate gray tone, where orthochromatic tone tends to turn certain tones into darker. But two different images of almost the same things, but neither is different. Now, in digital cameras, you have the ability to shoot in monochrome. In smartphones, you have the ability to shoot in filters, which is either monochrome, silverchrome, or film noir. So you have that ability to change the image. And sometimes black and white is the only way to go. Black and white brings yourself into the picture sometimes more than color does. There's also a technique, if you have a dated digital camera and you don't mind spending $300, there's a guy in Connecticut who will go and take your digital camera and they remove the Bayer filter that translates tonal into color tonal, and all digital cameras are born as infrared cameras, and you can now take infrared digital pictures. You can buy infrared film too, a little more difficult, but infrared changes the whole concept of how we see color. So this is up at Camp High Rock. Lake scene very different. Counselor scene very different. But infrared is unique. And I only used infrared once in my entire professional career and got paid for it. Actually twice. Once was I was photographing a building out on the West Coast that was very, very shiny. And I decided to take some infrared images of it, and it changed the shininess to such a uniqueness that the company just loved what they did. But infrared is something that is, I don't know any cameras that shoot infrared that are standard on it, but you could, like I said, you can get cameras or you could buy film. Another issue is whether it is black and white digital or color digital. So these are sort of the same images of a barn that my neighbor owns. This is black and white digital. The light was not direct at all. But if you look at this, there's color only here. And everything else looks black and white because the only color that was going to be, the only light that was coming through was at this window. So to see something, to see color, you need three things. You need a source, in our case, the sun, or in a house of light, or a flash. You need an object, and you need a viewing device. So the question is, at nighttime, is grass green? Sure, it's green, except since there's no source to reflect the green from the grass, you're going to see it as a different tonality. So you could buy filters for your camera that convert color to black and white. And if you watch a bunch of old films, you'll see, particularly John Ford uses this technique a lot. He would put a filter on that converted daylight into nighttime, and it sort of looks like a night. You could get filters for your camera that will allow you to strip all of the color away from an image. So you could shoot with a color camera, but you'll be getting black and white images. So this next series of slides is infrared. This is one of the two jobs that I was paid to use infrared. I was hired by BBC Yorkshire about 20 years ago now to photograph a bunch of old churches, cathedrals in Yorkshire. And I convinced them not to shoot it in film. Digital really wasn't available, readily available at the time. And I convinced them to shoot it in infrared film, and the images just screamed of ghost and oldness. And this was about a 30-image sequence. And I just found some of the prints yesterday of this. And it adds on a totally different aspect to it. Number one, some infrared films emphasize the sky, others neutralize tonality here. Most of them diffuse light because they have a different focusing level. But no matter what you think of these images, they are not traditional. They are unique tools to use. Now, I don't know of any tools that you can convert images to infrared in post-production, but it's a consideration. And then you have the concept of color versus black and white. So this is a color image down, it's slightly cropped to fit the screen. Down the road from me in just before the Connecticut border in Sheffield. And this is a color version of it. Literally taken seconds apart. This one is with film with a 4x5 field camera. This is with my iPhone, matching the closest aspect ratio. Two different feelings of the imagery, for a lot of reasons. One, the leading in and the sky, but the color changes the mood dramatically. So you got to consider media. I believe you got to consider media. I also shoot in instant cameras. So I've got an instant camera that my son bought me for my birthday a couple of years back that I just love to use. And I have an instant camera, and I also have a pinhole camera, and I use them both. So these are instant pinhole images, and you get a very, very unique look to the camera. Get a lot of error-prone images, but you know what? It's part of the media that you use and part of the function. Recently, I've been experimenting with pinhole cameras I've been making myself. Actually, I just led a course on that the last 3 weeks. And this is a Amazon shipping box. Put a hole in it, bought some direct positive film, processed the film in coffee called caffeinol processing. And these lines are processing errors, but after a little bit of technique. All pinhole cameras are slightly out of focus, but you can get a pretty cool image with them as well. And again, they change the concept of creativity. This picture here is with an instant camera. Actually, I'm using my iPhone to trip the shutter, and this is done with an instant camera. So it has a totally different viewpoint, totally different feeling of what the picture is. And these are all things that add to the creativity of an image. So I mentioned bokeh before. Bokeh is the concept of the lens has been designed by the leaves that make the shutter, have been designed to diffract light in a certain way. But what ends up happening is bokeh is available in nearly every camera that you own or every lens you own. It's the extent of the bokeh that is in question. So here's two shots. This is East River near the 59th Street Bridge. One on the left is a traditional photograph. The bridge is the important part of it. We could be singing, feeling groovy while we take this picture. But you'll notice that this scope of trees is nearly diffused. Now, your eye tends to look for sharp things. So even though this is visible, your eye is going in here first. Now, if you want to do a test, you need to put your camera on manual focus. And what you could do is go to a screen in your house on a window and focus on the screen so the screen is very, very sharp and take the picture. Then without moving, focus on the scene behind the screen and take the picture. And what you will see is the screen will nearly disappear. And using bokeh, you can make things in the foreground, chain link fences, flowers, people, almost disappear. One, it's called focus by cropping, no, cropping by focus. And you could do that, but this adds a total different feel to the picture. So this was used in a magazine because they have to put type here. If they had to put type here, it would be very, very hard to read. And there are lenses I mentioned by many, many companies. If you just Google or search bokeh lenses, you'll see. So this is a company called Meyer-Goretz. Meyer-Goretz is a company that has been around since the 30s, made some of the most unique lenses in the world, went out of business 1,000 times since then, went out of business about 3 years ago. Before they went out of business, they sent me a number of lenses to beta test. And this lens here, this is in focus, but look at the beauty of the out of focusness. And depending upon how far that item was, that's a car, and what was reflecting, you get this these gorgeous different levels of bokeh. It's just incredible. And here's another lens that what they call a soft focus lens. It's sharp here, but look at this beautiful, almost velvety feeling. And this is selective focusing, but the lens has been designed to provide this look. Here's two other ones. So one of the other lenses I tested was they call a nature lens. And the idea is you photograph something that is a tree, a flower, a plant, and the background drops so softly out of focus. Now, you could do that with your cameras as well. You put your camera setting on AV, open it up wide, let it adapt, and you're going to get a similar type of effect. But you may not get the beauty of some of this bokeh because these lenses are designed for that. If you own an iPhone, a relatively new iPhone, you have a thing called depth effect, which you could use, which you put your finger on the item, and you're going to see a scale come on the bottom. You're going to drag the scale to the largest decimal number, let's say 3.5 or 2.8, and you're going to get this effect. Depth effect is available on nearly all modern smartphones, anything from iPhone 7 and Samsung 8s and such up. And then you see here, this is in focus here, but look at the beauty of this out of focus. Now, you don't see it, but this is a truck driving down Route 7. So I made the truck disappear by using focusing. So going back to the automatic setting, this is a shot from the bridge over Route 7 near Stockbridge, which is what my camera saw. This one, I'm going to show you a close-up one. This is what I wanted it to be. And I think this is a much more powerful image that indicates movement because my eyes are not getting trapped by all of the garbage that's here. And all I had to do was basically, this is with a traditional digital camera, was underexpose the camera. So everything became darker, and I made that decision. So I wanted to see that little bit of sunlight that was setting the setting sun. All right, before I go into the next series, there are no chats, and if you don't have any questions, I'm going to continue. Okay. Point of view. I'm a real big believer in you have to have your point of view. If you follow any photographers, no professional photographers, ask them what their point of view is, and after a little bit of discussion where they say, oh, I don't have a point of view, I shoot whatever it is, you're going to find out there are certain things that they like. Not that they use them all the time, but there are certain images, certain ways they like things composed. Nothing wrong with that. I like to change my point of view. So this is getting out at the Chambers Street subway station in Manhattan. This is the way it was. You could tell this is a slower shutter speed because I've made this moving person almost disappear. And here's the way I saw it. Now, this camera allows me to adjust retouching in the camera itself. So after I took this picture, I was able to literally go into that same photograph and adapt it. But you could again do this with your cameras by adjusting exposure or shutter speed. And it changes the dynamics of the photo. Here, it's an identifiable subway scene. Here, it is something that looks like a subway scene. Point of view also relates to the aspect ratio. So last year, I was down in Washington doing some photography for a publication, and that part of it was Union Station. And I remember reading the article that the guy wrote, actually the woman wrote, and it had talked about the arches of the station. So here's the arches of the station in a portrait or vertical mode. Here are the arches of the station in a landscape mode. To me, this is the image I use anyway. To me, this is a more powerful image because it gets the scope of the arches in. So point of view is important. And you'll see a lot of photographers, as I say, shoot from about 5 feet 5 inches high. This is shot, this is in the Bahamas. It's a beautiful sailing trip there, 8 days, about 7 years ago, where I actually got down on the ground and used a wide angle lens so I could get as much of the scene in as possible. So normally, if you're shooting this at a normal version, your eye level would have been here and you'd have lost this wonderful patina of sand, even those little spots of glycerin here. So point of view is a critical aspect of it. And you don't have to be far away to do that. You can be ultimately very close to something. This is at a car show in Connecticut just a couple of weeks ago where I got really close and I was photographing the pinstriping, and then I saw all of these beautiful reflections, and I'm in here someplace. I think I'm over here. But anyway, this is just, to me, another point of view. And it doesn't have to work with direct reflections. It could work with indirect reflections. This is in Great Barrington. This is Main Street in Great Barrington reflected in the hood of this car. So you have this ability to play. Also, because I knew what time of day it was, and I'll talk about this later, I knew that these pictures, these are all late in the afternoon, early evening, were going to be more yellow and red because we have this thing called the golden hour, which occurs around sunset, that changes the color. And you see here how yellow everything is because this was done literally in the first hour and a half of what they call the golden hour. You also can be further away. So this is a shot of Coney Island done with a film camera where I wanted to show the openness, the emptiness of it. Getting up close wouldn't have worked. And just by having these people in the scene, there's very powerful symmetry in here. You get the picture that, where's everybody, right? And that could set a mood. This was back with feeling and emotion. The next picture was in Italy, just north of Rome, where I followed around this octopus fisherman for about 45 minutes. And there were other people fishing at the time, but I was taken aback by his solitude was the word I want to use. Yeah, solitude of when he did this. He would literally park his boat, and you'll notice the very shallow water, and he would wait staring down for moments on edge until he would see an octopus and he would get it. Now, it was a funny thing because my wife loves octopus. I don't, but we ended up having one of his octopuses for dinner that night. But this is loneliness, and it's solitude and loneliness because he's only part of the center of the image. Everything around him is blank, empty. Then your eye is being led up to him. So solitude is cool. There's another type of solitude. So this is a shot I took Brooklyn Bridge train station. This is the one I mentioned. A guy in Brooklyn saw this, and he's having a 20, I think it's 22 by 12 or 24 by 16 print. This is made with a high resolution camera that I have, so this can get enlarged to almost anything you want. But this shows a different type of point of view. It identifies Brooklyn Bridge, City Hall, this person by themselves. This person is out of focus purposely, so I wanted this to over-dominate it. So you had that capability. Point of view is also something about looking up and looking down. This is my most favorite building in the world. Now I always get this confused with what's the name of the ruins in Athens? Oh well, anyway, I'll think about it in a second. Anyway, this is in Italy, in Rome. I was on assignment, and I was asked to photograph a bunch of tourist attractions. And I was looking around, and I said, everyone shot these pictures from a standpoint of looking right at everything. I decided to shoot this standpoint of looking up, and I caught this, what I consider a cool image of what is called the oculus, or the devil's eye, the devil's hole. And I'll remember the name of the building in a second. And
The Acropolis.
Sorry?
Acropolis.
No, the Acropolis is in Athens. This is in Rome. This begins.
Sorry.
That's okay. No, it was a great choice. But the point is, sorry?
Il Duomo? No.
No. The Duomo's in Milan. I got a shot of that too. But I'll think about it. Huh? The Pantheon. Yeah. So this is the Pantheon, and the one that's in Rome always get. But I love this building. I could spend. It's a very. If you haven't been there, it's a relatively small building, but I could spend hours just walking around. The building is just magic to me. Anyway, so also this is a shot of St. Peter's Basilica. Again, I didn't want to shoot it traditionally because there were too many traditional photographs. So I had checked my TPE, which I'll get to in a little while, and I waited until I knew the light was going to be at a certain angle, and I shot the shot. And again, a lot of these things were used in stock photography, so they become beneficial. Also, I don't always look up. I often look down. Looking down to the point where I'm just at a hotel in Rome. I think it was in Rome, where I just like the geometry. I'm a very much geometry and shapes photographer, and geometry and shapes are one of the key elements of fine art photography. That's what you wanted to convey. So when you look around, I always say, look forward, look up, look down, look left, look right, look at angles, and turn around to see what's going on behind you. Because oftentimes, that's where the better shot is. So effects. Arthur mentioned before Vaseline. So I have a series of clear filters, which I purchased at the Snapshot in Great Barrington for, I think, $5 or $6. I mean, this is my desk, right? And what I did is I have them, one of my filters is just a protective filter, because I always have protective filters over my lenses, right? And then what I do is I have a series of filters that I put Vaseline or different gels on. So Vaseline is one, hair gel is another, hand cream is another. I have a couple that I've actually etched with a sandpaper, and I have others that I've etched in a circle with a sandpaper. They all give different impacts. And this funny story behind this, I gave this class, I gave a class like this a couple of years ago in the city, and I was very, very specific. I said, if you do this off the camera, do this on a filter, don't do this on a lens. And the next day, a person came in really, really ticked off. What they did is they had taken grease from a car, and they smeared it right on the lens. And it looked gorgeous, but it ruined the lens. We cleaned it the best we could. So if you're going to do this, you could do this specifically on a piece of a filter. Now, if you have a body cap to your camera, if the body cap is off the camera and you measure the perfect center and you drill extremely small, about I'm going to say a 32nd of an inch drill in the center of that, and then you put that on where your lens is, now you've created a pinhole camera for your digital camera. But drill off the camera. I know somebody who drilled on the camera and had to spend $4,000 on getting a sensor replaced, right? So drill off it. Like I said, I've got a series of cheap filters that I constantly manipulate. I even have one that is shattered. I put tape on it and I shattered it, and it gives this very, very, really cool effect. Okay. Any questions? Teresa, thank you very much for the compliment. Let's see. Yep. And thank Hildy and SAC for bringing it in. So weather. So I'm a sailor, so I'm very, very aware of weather. And on, I think it was Tuesday night, I went out because I was following the weather. There was some clouds, and I wanted to get some nice sunset shots, right? So weather's important because weather does things like this. If you know that there was moisture in the air, and there's a bunch of websites that you could check out, if you go to NOAA and go to their aviation segment, they have a marine segment and an aviation segment, it will tell you cloud cover at different altitudes. It will tell you moisture content, temperature, a bunch of things. And depending on what time of day it is, you could actually benefit from that. So again, not a spectacular image, but an image that's uniqueness. These are baby cumulus clouds developing. So you know it's going to be a red sky at night, sail is the light. You know that the sun's low in the sky. Well, you get this really beautiful array, and this is a great background shot. You could also, using film, so this is on the, there's a bridge on the Hudson River where you could walk over the bridge, right? The Hudson River walkway. So I was carrying with me a film camera. I love film because it has a granular effect to it that's hard to duplicate in digital. And I saw the thunderstorm moving up. Now, I always use a yellow 2 filter when I shoot black and white because it emphasizes contrast. But I just think this is like a magical image here that could tell you a bunch of different stories. And when rain comes, people usually run inside when rain comes, but you know how easy it is to capture rain? This is not rain that is on my lens. This is rain that is dropping in the sky, and this is rain that I caught literally as it fell from the sky. How did I do that? Magic. Now, what I did is I set my shutter speed at a 1,000th of a second. So I went to a TV setting, set it 1,000th of a second, and I took a couple of shots, and then I adjusted my shutter speed until I literally captured the rain dropping out of the sky. And it is a simple function. And the more intense the rain it is, the better it is because you could start changing your field of focus. Now, I did use manual focus because if you use automatic focus, it oftentimes doesn't register in rain. And I'll explain the reason why later on. But you could capture rain or snow. It doesn't really matter. Fog. If you subscribe to NOAA Radio, weather.gov, and type in your town, you'll get reminders. They usually give you a prediction the night before when there's going to be intense fog. And intense fog is a beautiful thing to photograph. Now, you've got to adjust your shutter speed. You got to adjust your exposure in intense fog. And the simplest way of doing that is to what they call bracketing, because sometimes fog will trick your camera into thinking that there's a lot more light than there is. So if you bracket your camera, you'll get a shot on and a couple of shots up and a couple of shots down. One of those shots will be acceptable. With fog, there's a beauty to it. After a storm is also unique. So this is last fall. I was in New York City. I love to jump on the ferry when I had nothing to do. And I'm on the ferry and a storm just came through. And you can see this is called a confused sky. So when sailors see this, they either know something had happened or something's going to happen. And you'll see the contrails, which means there's high levels of moisture in the air. But you could create an image almost everywhere. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next section here, which is called angles. So angles are everywhere. And angles tend to be tension for a lot of people. From a design standpoint, angles are tense. But angles are a cool thing to look. Now, these two shots are on the railroad bridge that's over near CVS, whatever street that is. And this is selective focusing, and this is not selective focusing. Oh, I'm sorry, this is on Route 7 in Ashley Falls, 7A, sorry. This is on the bridge near CVS. There are so many wonderful shots on bridges from underneath, from on top, from sideways. I could spend the day shooting them. A great bridge to shoot at, but you got to be really, really careful about the trains, is the bridge in Housatonic that goes over whatever road it is, 183, I think. Because you could shoot up, you could shoot down, you could shoot crossover. There's beautiful texture, patina that's on the walls. Just be aware of trains do run there, and we wouldn't want you to be run over by a train. It'd be sad. Okay. Street photography. As I mentioned before, street photography is something that it can be emotional to a lot of people. Excuse me. Street photography for me is something that I like to do, and I like to do it in sequence. So the next two photos you're going to see are actually 6 different shots taken seconds apart, because you'll see why I did that in a moment. So this is down on 8th Street. This is the Music Inn. If you ever been there, I bought my first sitar at the Music Inn. And this guy was out there playing, and this guy was out there observing. And if I go back and forth really quick, you'll see what happened. He's joining, and then he's not. He's joining, and he's not. The other 2 photographs, he's adjusting his crotch, and the other photograph, he's sort of making a phone call. So within a matter of probably 2 seconds, I started to tell the visual story.
Much better. Yeah.
Right? And it becomes an interesting part. It becomes an interesting part of what goes on in life. And street photography does this in a lot of different ways. You could start adapting street photography. This is down in Canaan, Connecticut, by getting to a low angle, having a slow shutter speed, and all of a sudden a speeding train looks like a speeding train, not a train that's just moving. Or this is up next to the Museum of Natural History, where the reflections of the city were a pretty nice balance to what was being sold in the window. So street photography has a variety of different functions and a variety of different sort of illustrative emotions. When I was down in Coney Island last May, it was closed. That was the reason I'm going there. I wanted to show, again, this is a boundary issue. Though you see the chain link fence, it's slightly out of focus, so your eye gets to see the wonder wheel first, but you can see I'm being barred from going in there. Angles that are not traditional. So normally, if this was a traditional angle, the sign would be here. But now I'm using, and I'll talk about this later on, leading lines to get my eye sweeping down, more leading lines. Visually, to me, it's a more powerful image. And I was getting on the train, getting back the train, and I noticed this food wagon from the inside, and it just said, there's nobody there, there's nobody eating. It was probably later in the afternoon. The greenness is from the reflection that's underneath the tunnel, but I felt as a cityscape, this actually works out well. I'm also one of the few people that define cityscapes versus street photography. Cityscapes usually don't have people in them for me. Sorry, wait, I want to go back one more. So this is a shot down on Cornelia Street, down in the village. I just like to set up, there's a story here. These people, she's by herself, he's by himself. Seconds later, the waiter that was standing here came out and took the shot away. So again, the observation to be down there. Also, your cameras, particularly your smartphones, have presets. Start using presets for what they're not designed for. So in the iPhone, you got this thing called a portrait preset. Use it for still lifes. Use it for regular pictures. It changes the dynamic. So here's a shot that the camera thinks this is a head, but it's actually the reflection of a van's mirror, which gives me a very unique shot. You know, I was experimenting making bread, and I really couldn't get the right shot with my camera, so I took my iPhone, put it on portrait, and made a portrait of the bread. So you don't have to, just because the preset says landscape, who cares? They tell you not to shoot into the sun, and shooting into the sun can be very, very exciting, very, very unique. White balance. Nearly all of our cameras have a preset white balance called AWB. On most smartphones, you can now select the white balance based on temperature or time of day or scene. And on most digital cameras, you could select them. They have bright sun, shade, cloudy, tungsten lighting, incandescent lighting, daylight, and a variety of other ones. But white balance, again, why use it? This is an automatic white balance of the Church in Lee. Here, I changed it to tungsten. So it changed the glow of the sunset and made everything more blue. Now, is it beautiful? I like the right-hand shot better than I like the left-hand shot, but you have that option to take a standard traditional shot and manipulate it any way you want to manipulate it because you've got all these different tools. Beauty shots are shots that so when I carry, yeah, we are getting close to, we're almost done. I'm going to speed through the next bunch of shots. Sorry about this. You can tell my passion gets me carried away.
Really don't,
Yeah.
don't speed up. If people need to drop off, they can.
They'll drop off. Okay. All right. Yeah, this is going to be recorded anyway. Okay. Yep. So beauty shots are shots. I always carry a camera with me. So I was in Mallorca on an assignment, saw this picture, loved it for a lot of different reasons. This is in Vieste in Italy, was having lunch up here, just liked the shot, took it. This is in Sardinia, and I just happened to like very painting-like scope to it. In Sicily, a couple of close-ups. In Tuscany, a couple of close-ups. So having a camera with me, I usually have a camera that I shoot just general shots. I thought them through because I went out there with the idea, but they don't really have a segmentation to them. Oftentimes, I will only photograph themes. I did the same theme last year. I only photographed hands in windows, mostly mannequin hands in windows. But the next theme is a series of people pictures. So people really have difficulty capturing people in imagery of portraits because they're afraid they're going to offend the person. But if you start a conversation with someone and say, can I take a picture? Before they have the chance to say no, they'll say yes. And they'll think about it, they'll say no. And one of the things about portraits is, Robert Capa said, if the picture's not good enough, you're not close enough. Well, with portraits, you want to be close. So it's a guy in a meeting. He had this really smiling face. I said, hey, look, his name was Robert. I said, Robert, can I take your picture? And he sort of thought about it. And before he had a chance to say no, I took it. This is my wife's nephew. We were in a restaurant in Oklahoma. Just like the smile on his face. I like the artistic painting like background. I used to work with a guy named Rennie over at the Cobble. He always had this scene at the end of the day, this little smirk on his face. And again, I'm getting close up. I'm getting close to them. And look at the eyes. The eyes are telling it all. The eyes become fixation of my focus. A guy named James Doyle from up in Dalton. Didn't ask him to take his picture afterwards. He smiled. But you can see, right, looking directly at me. Nice symmetry, nice tonality. The ski instructor up in Knoxview, she needed a picture of herself for a biography. Took this picture, just happened to like the picture. She wanted the glasses off, but I felt the glasses on let her eyes squint less, so it worked out for me. And then a couple of years ago, I had a friend of mine lent me a lens from 1930. I'm always looking for old lenses. So if you hear from old Leica lenses or old camera lenses from before 1955, let me know. I always like to shoot with them. The bokeh is beautiful, but you'll notice there's no blacks and there's no whites because the lens is uncoated and it softens the feeling of everything. Same thing with this is the guy, Joe, I think it is, from the package store. The lens softens. There's really no true blacks, really no true whites in it. Same thing with, I think Linda is a name from BCC. Same thing with a woman who was working at IS 183. The lenses are not very sharp. There's always a little bit of out of focus to them, but this is a beautiful, moody shot. And I could, her contemplation is like, what are you doing, right?
Yeah.
Someone's going to say something?
No, that's a very good composition because smiles tend to take away from personality.
Yeah, people think smiles are like this, but they're not. I mean, and that's why shooting a series of imagery of a person is a lot better than shooting just one image. This is a woman that I used to work with. She owns a business called Sailors NYC. I used to be one of her captains, and she hated taking pictures. I said, come on, her name was Nissan, and it was cold. It was in January, and she said, yeah, okay, and she smiled. And again, this is an old lens, no whites, no blacks, but beautiful tonality into the whole thing. And then pictures don't have to be just with people. They could be groups. This is on Bartholomew's Cobble, sun setting at the left there, golden hour, two guys playing music on the hill. And my son Dylan, when he was in a swimming event over at Mount Everett, and then he was also a swimmer over at Berkshire Community Center. You could take a series of pictures so you're identifying what he's doing. And that's always a nice thing to do. Mini stories are really cool. So getting to the end of this, is there a way that you can change your or improve your compositional skills? Yeah. So there are these things called templates. And there's one called the rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds basically divides your viewfinder into 9 squares. And where those squares intersect are areas to put key elements. And if you have a traditional smartphone, there is a grid setting, and you could set your grid to your smartphone. In most digital DSLR cameras, you have grid settings. There's usually a 9, a 18, a 36 grid setting. You could set those at all. But if you put important things on where the grids intersect, your eye go to those 3 things first. And then if you vary that by size, large image, small image, medium image, your eye is going to be sweeping around. So that's a really easy tool to use. Leading lines are everywhere. Leading lines are anything that brings your eye or the eye of the viewer into the picture. Curbs, a sliding pond, a train track, the angle of a building. You saw the Coney Island, the leading line of the cyclone. You saw the Key West picture. The leading lines is the entire path that goes in. Leading lines are everywhere. All you need to do is to be aware of them. The center image is what is primarily used in portraits, where the person's head is at an applicable size that makes the image unique and interesting. Framing is literally, you see me behind a picture I took in Monument Valley. Those two views are framing me. Framing can be used in windows, in doorways. You can use people to frame. You can use anything at all that restricts your vision from exiting the photo that moves into the center of the photo. The cutoff, if you remember the pictures I did of the angles, those are really tight images that don't show you the entire photograph, because the entire photograph to me was ineffective, right? Close-up. All your cameras have the ability as a preset to go extremely close. You have on your DSLRs a preset with a tulip. That will bring you to about 8 inches of where you can get. Your smartphones have the ability to get within 1 or 2 inches of an item. So getting up is really powerful. Angles, sweeping up, sweeping down, architecturally designed. If you're ever out on the West Coast and you go to, I think it's the Disney Theater, it's all made of these incredible angles. Shooting straight on, they all look flat. But going low, going high exaggerates that whole thing. Symmetry, the balance between up and down, left and right, angle to angle, yin and yang, real easy to obtain. It takes a little bit of practice, but you can use symmetry anywhere. Patterns is another one where you are looking at something that's repetitive. So if you go up to Namkeg and you look at the stairway going up, that's a pattern. Most people shoot the entire stairway, but just shoot the stairway where the pattern is. And there are loads more. I'm going to give you 2 books or a couple of books to write down at the end. So before I go to the last slide and sum up, in the next couple of minutes, let me know what you thought. But here are some books that you may want to consider. Ansel Adams created 5 or 6 books. One was on artificial light, one's on natural light. They talk more about the exposure, but if you read them carefully, he makes a distinct differentiation between artificial light and natural light. And I think you need to be aware of that when you're out in daylight. Daylight today is a diffused light. There's no real highlights, no real darknesses. You can play with that. There's a book called The Photographer's Eye by Michael Friedman. It has so many templates in it that it's, to go back to one of my first slides, there's definitely too much information here. My suggestion is to pick 1 or 2 templates, experiment with them to the point where you say, oh, I now have got these down, and then move on to more. Learning to See Creatively is a similar style book. The Photographer's Eye has better pictures. It's up to me, but I think either one of those would work to get you moving on. Inspirational sources. So I have a couple of feeds from Instagram and a couple of books I look at regularly. So I like Edward Weston, I like Irving Penn, I like Alfred Stieglitz. I like a lot of different photographers. I'm constantly looking at to see what they did, not to copy. I don't copy, but just to get an idea of what I want to do. Then I look at technical sources to see what's going on. You know, there's a couple new lenses coming out. There's a couple new cameras coming out that have uniqueness to them. Okay, so I am going to open this up to as many questions as you want. There is my email address, thad@tbkphotos.com, my cell phone. If you got questions about this presentation or the one before this, feel free to email me or call me. I usually get back to people relatively quickly, but I'm going to open up the chat box and I'm going to open up, please unmute yourself. And if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, I'm game.
That I have one.
Go ahead.
When you were doing the panorama of the picture window, now you were mentioning, were you actually going straight across with the camera, or were you going up a little bit when you were actually taking it?
So I was going as straight across as I could, but I was varying the speed.
Okay.
So what's happening is the data, what a panoramic image does is it actually writes the data in strips. So if you slow up, it overlaps, or if you speed up, it extends. If you go up and down, you'll get a waving effect, but you'll also get black areas where no data has been captured.
Oh, okay.
The camera can't react that quickly for it. But it's a cool, I've got a nice technique. I did a show in Sheffield last year of Sheffield only of panoramic images. And it's a nice technique to use. Anybody else?
Yeah, we have somebody up in the area here. Gregory Crutzen. He's an interesting guy. You know, he doesn't shoot portraits but he does setups. He will rent out the entire town of Pittsfield and use a studio camera, an 8x10 camera. But it's fascinating how he lights and creates these images that sell for well over $100,000.
Yeah, I've seen his images. Yeah, it's a unique technique. And again, when you're going into that's called compositional photography. When you're going into that is a uniqueness. I mentioned light painting. Light painting is when you're photographing in a dark room and your subject is holding different color lights in their hands. So for example, if you search for Picasso light painting, you'll see what's probably the most famous light painting photograph that was ever made. It's literally him creating an abstract painting with light. So there's nothing wrong with what Gregory does, what Picasso does. It depends what you want to do. It goes back to this idea of seeing, thinking, and doing, and putting yourself into the picture. A couple of years ago, I was hired by an airline to photograph a bunch of maintenance work at a Los Angeles LAX. And I set this up to what they call light painting, where we probably had on hand at the time $250,000 worth of lighting equipment. And we did these photographs in a long view. So we photographed the guys getting tools, walking the plane, repairing the plane, and walking back. And each one was lit, and it took us hours. We did them at night. It took us hours to light them. But they were incredible pictures. They were like some of these commercials you see where you see a person walking through 10 different scenes. Those are done with CGI. We were doing it with film. And I've seen Gregory's stuff. It's impressive. And again, if that's what you like, hey, if you take more pictures, then do it.
Yeah, I enjoy using a film camera as well. If you really want to learn composition, and is when you only have 36 images that you could take on it. I use I got a Leica F4 that I play with along with my digital stuff. So it really sharpens your eye to look at exactly what you spoke about, to get images that are spectacular instead of taking 5,000 pictures. Yeah, I love that.
I'll tell you, if you want to do something, and again, listen carefully because I don't want you to mess up your camera. Take a piece of paper and cover your viewing screen in the back, and only take the picture, and then you don't look at it until maybe the end of the day. So don't look at it in the viewing screen. Just look at it in the viewfinder, right? Because what ends up happening, we get involved in this thing called chimping, where we take a picture, look at it, take a picture, look at it. We're missing those moments in between. So with film, there's no way of looking at that, though there is a tool now that you can. With film, you take the picture, you can't see it until it's processed. And I process my own stuff in my darkroom, and I get a great kick out of, oh, I did this, oh, I forgot this shot, so exciting, you know. But try to cover your viewing screen with a piece of paper so you can't see the picture until hours later when you're looking at it on your screen. But film is definitely the way to go.
There was something called I know the rule of thirds, but there's something called the golden, you know, it's lines converging from the left to the right and forms like a spiral. I think the golden circle. I don't recall exactly.
It's called the golden rectangle.
Yes.
And
yes.
the golden rectangle is a painting technique that was primarily used by people, the Dutch painters. And what it's also called the Fenerbahce series. No, it's if you watch the movie, what's the movie with Tom Hanks and he's in a lure dancing around chasing somebody? The Fabinici cycle, I think it's called. Anyway, what it is an area is, I've got a book. I'll find the book. It's you take your area and it's divided into segments that double and half and quarter. And depending upon where they double, half, and quarter, the image becomes extremely exciting. Rembrandt's The Night Watch. You can search The Night Watch. You'll see he's a portrait of him is in the upper right-hand corner. And you see him almost immediately, but then your eye jumps to the scene in the center. He worked with the golden rectangle. There are 4 or 5 different versions of that. The rule of thirds is sort of the grid concept that you divide it into 3 different aspects of it, or 3 different elements.
You don't place anybody in the center.
So Thad, I'm gonna wrap things up. This is wonderful. I know from the responses. I mean,
yeah, I'm sorry I ran late.
No, please. And we could have gone another 2 hours. I just need to wrap up, but thank you so much. Your email is there. I know you do give private lessons. And I know people are going to walk out of here with kind of a new way of seeing things. Great to see everybody on the call. Sandisfield Artts Center, like us on Facebook and bookmark the website. And for Crossword Puzzle Addicts, Michelle Arnaud is doing a live session for us in August. So we're going to, but this has been a highlight of the summer. Thad, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming.
Good.